I'd like to thank our sponsors before we get on too far into the program. In Situ Boeing, Mary Hoyt and the Bruce Stevenson Foundation, Bev Thomas and Cam Thomas are all corporate sponsors for us, which really help bring these programs to you all. And of course, a special thanks to the Fort Vancouver Regional Libraries Foundation, who supports everything the Friends do. And a special thanks to the Friends of the White Salmon Valley Community Library. Their efforts are really what brought this program to you tonight. So thank you all to all of you who work with us on this program. So I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Peter Marbach. Peter will be sharing with us his thoughts and beautiful images presented in his book, Healing the Big River. Healing the Big River masterfully combines the art of visual storytelling with passionate essays. From the source, a tiny spring in the Canadian Rockies, to the sea, readers are guided on a journey back to the origins of the 1,243-mile river and learn about the complicated history and impact of the Columbia River Treaty. Peter resides in the heart of the Columbia River Gorge in Hood River and is currently commissioned by the Oregon Historical Society to document the best of the Oregon State Parks for the Park Centennial Anniversary in 2022. Before Peter speaks, just a little housekeeping. If you have a comment or question you'd like to ask Peter or say, please put it in the chat. And after Peter's done with his slideshow, I will bring your questions forward to him. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Peter Marbach. I'm going to step back and let you take over, Peter.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you for everyone who is taking the time out tonight to listen to this presentation. I'm super excited to do this. It's been a while since I've done one, so forgive me if I make any technological boo-boos here. So I'm just going to jump right in. For some of you who are climbers, perhaps you might know what this view is. This is from the summit of Mount Hood, watching the sunrise over the Columbia River. You can see this tiny little ribbon of water. That's the Columbia. The reason I'm starting with this image is that this is where this whole project began. Nearly 20 years ago, I underwent unexpected triple bypass open heart surgery. A year later, when I stood on top of the mountain and cried my eyes out, I made a promise that someday I would do a book project to honor the Columbia, because I had spent a lot of time along the shores hiking to heal. And when I could climb to the summit of Mount Hood again, I knew that I was whole again. So the concept for this book project got its roots right here. And it's also just a really cool image for any of you who've ever hoped of dreaming of climbing Mount Hood. I highly recommend it. Climb through the night and you can see something like this. Okay, so here's a map. Hopefully you can see it pretty well of the Columbia River Basin. The dark purple line traces the whole river. And most people don't know, and I didn't know when I started, where the river starts, and that it's over 430 some miles of the river is in Canada. And in my opinion, it's the most spectacular scenery in all of the Columbia River. I mean, the Columbia River Gorge, no doubt, is gorgeous, but if you have the opportunity to go up to the headwaters region and see it up there, you will be blown away to see what a wild and free river actually looks like. And here is an example. This is the river as it begins to flow out of Lake Columbia, that tiny little blue dot of water you see in the upper left corner. That's the north end of the lake. And the river from there flows wild and free, maybe 10, 15 yards across in these undulating curves, flowing northward between two gigantic mountain ranges. You have the Kootenai Rockies on your right and the Purcell Mountains to your left. And it is, honest to God, just an amazingly beautiful, drops you to your knees beauty. So every time I look at this picture, I laugh because it took me nearly 3 hours to do this. This is the self-portrait. I was trying to capture the joy of finding the headwaters, where the water bubbles up from an underground spring fed from the nearby Kootenai River. And it had been miserable weather just sideways gray, sleet, snow, and finally it cleared. So not having anyone around, I would put the camera on a timer and run, jump in, take a picture, and come back and look at it and like, oh, that's crappy, do it again. So it spent like 2 or 3 hours, but finally I got something that was worthy of capturing that essence of the moment of discovery of the headwaters. So this is a little bit up the river in Windermere, British Columbia. This is Alfred Joseph. He is a wise elder with the Ktunaxa Nation. And I had the privilege of sitting down and talking with him. And he told me the story of how in the early 1940s, I think it was 41 or 42, where his grandfather went down to the river to witness the return of the salmon, because the salmon used to go all the way from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the headwaters. And he went down there, and a week went by, weeks, a couple of months, no fish, no salmon, and they didn't understand why. He told me that he thought that they must have done something as a people to upset the creator, and the creator blocked the salmon coming home. But they had no idea that the Grand Coulee Dam had been completed enough to block the passage of salmon, which to this day, some 80-some years later, is still a real source of sorrow and sadness to all the people, not just tribal people, but everyone up above Grand Coulee Dam. So this is an aerial. I got over my fear of flying to go up in a little 2-seat plane that shows you the Columbia River in its natural state up in British Columbia. I mean, just take a look at this. See these braided channels. It's incredible between these two mountain ranges, and some of the wetlands areas there, I think, are on the UNESCO World Heritage Site as being I think the second most intact wetlands ecosystem in all of North America. It's just stunningly beautiful. So even though the salmon no longer come up all the way to the headwaters, the Ktunaxa Nation, the Akisquanik, and the Shuswap, they still celebrate a salmon harvest in September. But instead of having the salmon who usually came up there, they have to have salmon flown in from a different part of Canada where the salmon are still running, and they're able to have their festival. But they try their best to keep the traditions going, even though the salmon aren't running up there anymore. So I'm working my way north, and I saw this scene developing as I was driving along the highway going up toward Golden, but I couldn't figure out how to get down there because between me and this image was railroad tracks and about a 10-foot deep section and 12-foot high blackberry briars. But I did what I always do, what I have to do. I just tromped through it and ripped up my pants. I didn't care. I just had to get this shot. So we're looking at the Purcell mountain range reflecting in the calm waters of the Columbia. And so this is another aerial. You can see just how majestic this whole area is. The river that's flowing in the foreground is the Whoosh River, which originates from the Columbia ice fields. A lot of people mistakenly think that the Columbia ice fields is the source of the Columbia River, but it's actually not. It's one of many contributing sources, but again, just being up in the airplane to be able to see this glorious landscape is just absolutely mind-blowing. So the river now, we've gone around the big bend that you saw on the map, and it's flowing southward. This is what they call the Aero Lakes region, and I was trying to find a vantage point where I could show you most of the Columbia as it flows down from Revelstoke. And this is a peak called Mount Cartier. It's about 8,400 feet, and just spectacular view looking downriver. And this is in the summertime when this region, when this part of the river, the water level is high, because much like the Columbia River up there, the Aero Lakes section of it is a big giant reservoir which holds back water for hydro needs and for electricity needs that the U.S. demands on Canada. So one of the more enjoyable / emotional moments of this trip was I got to meet up with a youth brigade from the Upper Columbia United Tribes, and every year they get to have a canoe journey where they spend 6 months learning the art and the craft of building these canoes, and then they get in them and they go downstream from the border all the way down to Kettle Falls, just above Grand Coulee. And when they reach Kettle Falls, which is now underwater, much like Celilo Falls, they have a ceremony where they toss the rocks and stones into the river. And this is to commemorate and remember the sound that salmon hear when they are going upstream, or when they used to go upstream. It's the sound of rolling rocks underwater. So they were saying some really beautiful prayers and just commemorating what they call Big Brother salmon. And I'm sure in Blaine's presentation, you talked a lot about the Grand Coulee Dam, but I just had to go there and see for myself. And this behemoth in this picture looks pretty benign, but it's actually a little under 600 feet tall. But the interesting thing is where the water level is at the bottom of the dam, it's only another 250 feet to the top of the dam. And I went on one of the official tours there, and it was fascinating because they gave no explanation, not even a hint of any comments about the impact of the dam on fish and people's upstream, which I found fascinating. I thought they should at least own up to it. This is Randy Friedlander, a fish biologist with the Colville Confederated Tribes. And what we're seeing here is a really beautiful ceremony I got to witness. Every year in the spring at the first catch, when the salmon come upriver, just below Chief Joseph Dam, Randy catches the fish and cleans them, and then brings the carcasses and puts them in the river just below the Grand Coulee Dam. But while he's doing this, he's saying a prayer in his native language, honoring the salmon and apologizing to the Creator for what had happened to the river. And the symbolism behind this is that they feel that by placing the carcasses of the salmon in the river, that their spiritual DNA will be there. So when the salmon do return again, they'll be able to find their way because their ancestors' spirit and DNA is in the river. So I was very privileged, very moved to witness this moment. And so speaking of the Grand Coulee Dam and emerging fish passage technology, many of you may have heard of this company called Whoosh. I think it's spelled W-H-O-O-S-H-H. And they actually have this technology where they can shoot the salmon. And if you just Google the phrase salmon cannon, I know it sounds silly, but you'll see actually a very educational video of how this technology works. If you look way down in the bottom, there's a floating barge which has a fake waterfall and attracts the fish into this system. And this whole system is designed to safely transport fish and shoot them up and over dams. And they've already demonstrated that they can do this at a height of over 250 feet. So I'm just saying that the technology exists. It may not be a perfect technology. I've been told that the salmon have a 95% survival rate, but honestly, what's blocking them is just inertia on the part of the federal government and an unwillingness to allow this to be tested even further. So this is a sockeye salmon. I finally got one good underwater picture on the Okanagan River. I was told by the Okanagan fish biologist up there, he said, "Oh, you should come up in mid-October. We have thousands of them coming up, and all you got to do is get in the water, and you'll see, hundreds of them come right by you." Well, I spent 3 days there, and every time I got in the water and kneeled down, the fish would come within maybe 20, 30 feet of me, and then they would split off and go all around me. So finally, I feel like the universe or the Creator took pity on me, and this one fish came over just for literally maybe 10 seconds and just swam in front of me and then darted upstream, as if to say, "Hey man, thanks for what you're trying to do for us. I'll give you this one shot, but I gotta go." So that's par for the course of this project. I would spend many, many days trying to get one image, and sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. And so now we're back in the United States. This is down near the Wallula Gap, and what you're looking at here is on the Oregon side, the twin pillars known as the Cayuse sisters, which are very prominent in the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla mythology story. But to get this shot, I scaled up a cliff and watched the beautiful light at sunrise looking downriver. So this is a really wonderful moment. I was invited by Jeremy, who was the leader with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, and his son Aiden, and he was teaching him the 10,000-year-old tradition of dipnet fishing. But this is a much smaller dipnet than you see at some of the fishing platforms, like on the Klickitat River, where they just stick them into the smaller tributary gravel bars. But it was a lot of fun watching him patiently teach his son how to catch a fish, and I was honored to have been able to spend a day with them observing this. And some of you may have been lucky enough to see this, but we're in the far eastern part of the Columbia Gorge right now, and I remembered maybe a dozen years ago or so when the big Bighorn sheep were reintroduced to the Columbia River Gorge, and I thought to myself, well, I've got to somehow try to get a shot, because in a lot of the petroglyphs and pictograph fine arts, bighorn sheep are represented in the native art icon stuff. So I patiently waited for a moment when they would do the what I call do the headbutt thing, because they spent like an hour just chewing on grass, and finally they did their little thing, which is really cool. So some of you may have actually been at this event. This was 2007 at Celilo Falls. This was the 50th year remembrance, not a celebration, but what the tribes prefer to call a remembrance of the drowning of Celilo Falls. This was in March of 2007. And it was an amazing scene, because tribes from various parts, from Canada, from Montana, from the Pacific Ocean, they canoed down and all joined forces and gathered at the shores of Celilo, asking the Celilo chief for permission to come ashore. It was a very emotional moment for them to allow me to witness this moment. So this may be a very familiar scene to you folks, especially those who live close to white salmon. This is on the Klickitat River near Celilo Falls. I just had a great time just observing this one Yakima fisherman, and people have asked me, well, how did you get this shot? Because the water's all blurry and the pole is real still. Well, the fine art to doing this is when he was moving the pole back and forth, there's a millisecond where he pauses just for a second, and that's when I snapped the shot to be able to get him to be still and the water being silky smooth. So this is Annalise Whipple of the Warm Springs tribe. This was, oh gosh, over a decade ago. I was invited to join her and her parents out on the Warm Springs reservation to witness their annual traditional root harvest event. And they wore traditional clothing, and it was such a really beautiful time watching her and her sister dig for the roots. And I was, again, just very honored to be invited to witness this ceremony. So we all know the wonders of Dog Mountain, right? I mean, usually it's a premier wildflower destination, one of the best in all the Pacific Northwest, I think. But I also like to go up there when I see a forecast that says unstable weather. That usually means at some point there's going to be something dramatic that happens. And so sure enough, I went up there. It was just raining cats and dogs, and I was hiding under a tree. But just as the sun was going down, this brilliant light revealed itself. So I was able to get this shot quickly before getting soaked again by the rain, hiking down in the dark with a headlamp. So this is on the Lewis River Falls. Pretty amazing to see this place. I was trying to get a different shot from down below, but it wasn't working. So I actually climbed into the river nearby there and held onto a tree to get this shot. The Coulee tribe used to, before there was a dam that went in upriver, used to come down there and fish for salmon. But because of the dam upriver, they are no longer able to do that. But this is a tributary of the Columbia. So we're nearing the end here. I had heard in the forecast that there was going to be this brilliant combination of a full moon, a high tide, and a king tide, which is like a super tide. And there was tornado and lightning warning. So I drove down through the night. It was really quite amazing, very scary. And to get this picture, I had to lay on the ground at Cape Disappointment State Park and just wait for a moment when the wind and the rain stopped just long enough. And what I really love about this image is that the wind was so strong that instead of the waves crashing up against the basalt walls and coming right down, the wind would hold the mist up in the air and swirl it all around. And then, of course, after the storm, here we are at the confluence of the Columbia River and the Pacific, very calm, but pretty amazing when you think about the origins of the river, from this tiny underground spring where you saw me straddle the river to it flowing into the Pacific from all the volume of water from all the streams, all the rivers, all the snow melt. So it becomes this massive 3-mile wide confluence with the Pacific. So I end here with this very emotional ceremony I was lucky enough to witness. The Colville tribes were granted what's called a cultural release opportunity, where they were allowed to introduce salmon, a small amount of them, above the Grand Coulee Dam back into the river for the first time in over 80 years. And I can tell you, it was one of the most emotional experiences of this whole 14-year journey for me working on this book project, because people came from all over, from British Columbia, Montana, some people who are still old enough to remember when the fish were able to swim wild and free. So it was an electrifying moment for me, because when they released the salmon, I was standing in the water at a respectful distance, and the salmon swam right up against my leg, and I swear, like, the hair on my neck, on the back of my neck, just went right up, and I turned and I saw the salmon flow upstream. So they're conducting studies, seeing if the salmon will go up and find good habitat. So I was very fortunate. I have not, since COVID began, I have not been keeping up with the current events with the Columbia River Treaty, but I'm posting this up here too, and hopefully you can pull out your cell phones maybe and take a snapshot of this, or since this is being recorded, some of these links can be made available to you to find out about current events where the treaty is concerned. I know that negotiations were paused for a while, but they are still ongoing. But I'm optimistic and hopeful, especially now that our own Oregonian Chuck Sams from the Umatilla tribe has been nominated to become the next director of the national park. That's quite exciting, because the national park is one of the entities involved in the treaty negotiations. So it would be wonderful to have a friendly director weighing in on negotiations for the treaty. So I'll leave it there. I forgot there were some essay excerpts that I was going to read, but I'll put them aside and just say thank you and open it up to any questions you might have. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Peter. I am just now putting in chat these links that you have given us, so that if people want to click on them in the chat, it will open those links on their computer, and they will have those. Did you want to go back and read any of those excerpts, or you really don't want to?
Well, if there's time, I just was so engaged in the storytelling that it just slipped my mind. So with the book, and for those of you who haven't got it yet, I think there's 1 or 2 copies at the White Salmon library and gift shop, and I'm making the book available and giving 50% of the proceeds to the Friends of the White Salmon library. So make sure you go check it out. But really, the most important part of the book to me, I mean, I was the photographer, but it was the recruitment of some fantastic people from First Nations and tribal leaders in the United States and others who wrote really compelling essays on their reasons for wanting to see the salmon returned and their personal connections to the river. So I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts. This first one is from Pauline Turbasket. She's the executive director in British Columbia of the Okanagan Nation Alliance. I was born while the Columbia River Treaty was being negotiated. I would have been in first grade when it was signed. Little did I know the impact this international agreement would have on the lives of indigenous people. The agreement between federal governments to the benefit of their countries sold our waters and destroyed diverse ecosystems in our traditional territories for power generation and flood control. Our chief salmon was driven to near extinction. We lost lands, villages, original foods, burial grounds, cultural ways of life, and sustainable livelihoods up and down the whole river system. We continue to suffer from these losses, even to this day. Each year, we respectfully prepare for our annual salmon ceremonies under the guidance of our elders. Each year, we give thanks at our salmon feast. Each year, we honor, again, the stewardship and sacred responsibilities that will be passed on from generation to generation. This is the struggle for basic human rights in which we can never be less than relentless. This is the heady possibility of a different future for all people up and down the Columbia River system, for the good of all, for all time. And that's just a brief excerpt from one of the contributing guest essayists. And I'm just going to read one more, because this one, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time because it's always gets to me and always gets me pretty emotional. This was written by one of the youngest contributors, but no less brilliant. His name is Graham Lee Rowlands. He lives in British Columbia in Golden. And I'll read you an excerpt of his thing, because his voice represents the youth and the hope for the young people. At the essence of my generation is the experience of profound loss, the experience of grieving for things which are precious but can no longer be saved. My generation will be some of the last people to know glaciers on the mountain peaks. We will be some of the last to love many oceanside beaches. Some of the last to remember summers not consumed by wildfire and choked by smoke. Some of the first to get used to the term climate refugee. My generation will be one of the last who have lived in a time before this loss became, to some degree, inevitable. I have learned that grief is not the same as reciprocity. If we can only understand our world in terms of what has been lost, we will not be able to move forward. We need to be grateful. We need to heal. We need to fight cynicism and ignorance and defend what is left. We need to give back. We need to do it soon, and we need to do it well. For if we are going to participate wholeheartedly in the renewal of the world, we will need reasons to shed tears in triumph as well as in tragedy. I know that I, for one, will weep when the salmon come home. Wow, that's the first time I read that and didn't get all weepy. So,
Wow.
Anyway,
Very powerful.
That's just small snippets of some of the stuff that's in the book. It's not only essays, but there are two very incredible essays in the beginning, an introduction and a forward by Bobby Connor from the Temascala Cultural Institute as well, which is quite moving. So that's it.
Great. I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about the Columbia River Treaty? Just give us a quick background for those of us who don't know what the treaty is.
Sure. I would thought that Blaine might have gotten into that.
Well, he might have, but there might be people here who didn't hear Blaine, or
Sure. Well, to keep it brief, because this is like an hour discussion on just on the treaty. In the early 60s, the United States and Canadian governments reached an agreement on a treaty that would agree upon issues around flood control, hydropower, and irrigation. And what was unfortunate about this treaty was that the tribes in the United States and Canada both asked to participate, and they were denied. They were ignored. So none of their knowledge, none of their concerns about other dams being put in, none of that was taken into account. So you fast forward, 50 some years later, and as part of this treaty agreement, it's supposed to be renegotiated. And there's a 10-year window starting in 2014 to 2024 to renegotiate the terms of the treaty. This time around, there's a similar thing happening in the United States, at least. The tribes do not have an official seat at the table, but the Canadian government is a little more progressive. They have allowed 3 different tribes to be participating, to be providing input, but our State Department, which is the lead negotiator for the United States, still has not formally invited tribes that have an official seat at the table. The State Department does have sidebar meetings with some of the tribes in the United States, and they listen to what the tribes have to say, but whether or not they will incorporate what the tribes are hoping for, which is restoring the salmon runs and repairing salmon habitat, and to embracing some of the emerging fish technology that will allow salmon to go back home. So things were going forward, and then when the election happened and a new administration came in, there's hope now that it's a little friendlier administration toward salmon restoration, but these things all take time. But again, if you click on some of these links, they will provide you much more detail about what's going on currently.
Thank you. Appreciate that background.
Sure.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. One is, how serious is the plutonium, pesticide, and herbicides affecting the water quality from Canada to the Pacific?
I am going to plead ignorance on this. I do not know. I've heard it discussed. I know that people talk about the impact of the gas bubbles that form at the base of the dams, which also affect the salmon. One can just make a reasonable deduction that the pesticides and all the other affluent stuff that's coming into the river is an issue, but I honestly don't have a good answer on that one. So okay. My apologies.
No, you're not an expert on everything.
No, I mean, I'm a pretty good photographer. Other than that, I'm just winging it.
Okay, well, here's another question you can try. Okay. What is the possibility of fish ladders at the Grand Coulee Dam?
Oh, great question. Well, I don't know if Blaine had touched on this, but to make it really simple, when the Grand Coulee Dam was being built, they had the opportunity, they had the option to install fish ladders. The very short version is that our government asked the Canadian government if they cared one way or not, or another, whether or not fish ladders were installed, because they were saying that it was too expensive to do, and do you have a problem with that? And the Canadian government leaders basically said, no, we're fine with that, go ahead. That's a very simplistic summary of what happened, but that's basically what happened, is that there was a conscious choice not to put in fish ladders. I don't know how feasible it is to install fish ladders there now. It's very steep. You'd have to start it from really far out, and that's where something like this, the Whoosh innovation with shooting them up over the dam comes into play. The other option is that there's the old-fashioned, what they call trap and haul method, where you can take the salmon from below Chief Joseph Dam, which is 30 miles downstream from the Grand Coulee, truck them up to above the Grand Coulee Dam, put them in the water. But the challenge is for the returning juvenile salmon is how to get them down through the dams without them being chewed up through the turbines. So there is this thing called a floating surface collector, which can trap the fish as they come toward the dam, and then do sort of a reverse trap and haul thing, where they put them in this collector, load them into the trucks, and then put them back in the river down below Chief Joseph Dam, which is 30 miles below the Grand Coulee. So just a quick summary, fish ladders would have to be installed, or a fish passage, some kind of fish passage has to happen first at Chief Joseph, but that's below Grand Coulee. Then you have to figure out a way to get them up and over the Grand Coulee Dam. So yeah, I honestly don't know. There's a lot of talk about how it's just too much money and too expensive and this and that, but there are alternatives, and I think it's more of a lack of a will. on the part of government entities, you know, like the, oh, I'm losing my train of thought. Who's the Army Corps of Engineers and other people who are involved in some of the bureaucratic decisions. My sense is that there's just, you know, when they don't have skin in the game, they haven't been affected by the loss of the salmon as much as the tribes and First Nations. So I just haven't seen a lot of creative, progressive thinking on the top of government entities.
Thanks. There are no other questions in the chat, y'all. Oh wait, here we go. No, here we go. When we see the barges full of salmon hatchlings, where are they coming from and going?
Well, I know that they are going down. There is a one of the pictures it's in the book. There is a stretch of the Columbia River called the Hanford Reach, where the 4 treaty tribes from the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, every spring they go up there and they get the juvenile salmon that have made it that far, and they bring them down to a processing center in Richland, and they are tagged and put on barges, and I believe that they go downriver, and then they are then deposited at the various hatcheries along the river for them to then go back out to the ocean and come back, I think.
Okay, here's a question, another question for you. Would you like to see some of the dams removed? And if so, which ones?
Oh man, all of them. Honestly, I mean, it was interesting. I gave a talk, you know, back in pre-COVID days, and I got someone who was a really creative person. He said, you know, let's just leave all the dams there, but put solar panels on them, or put wind turbines there, and use them, since the ground has already been destroyed and chewed up, to generate, you know, clean energy. You know, leave the dams in place, figure out a way to get them more fish friendly. But you know, I mean, my goodness, I mean, it's it's just very personal to me, having spent so much time up in Canada and feeling the pain and seeing the loss and the ceremonies and the stories from First Nations and some of the elders up there. I mean, once you put a dam in, you forever mess with the way the river is supposed to flow. And of course, yes, we all have benefited from the dams, from the cheap hydro and the agriculture and all that. But you know, it was a taking. It was a taking of lands that belonged to the tribes. It was a taking of a way of life that the salmon had known all their life. And so, gosh, yeah, I mean, the ones that I guess I would clarify that the ones that have fish ladders and are working, and maybe leave them in place. But you know, the Grand Coulee Dam, oh, I'd love to see that sucker gone. I mean, you know, somebody wanted to go up there and detonate it, I wouldn't be disappointed.
Here's a question about sea lions for you. Sea lions are increasing and eating many salmon. What should we do about this?
Oh boy, that's such a subjective question.
I thought you would say take photographs of it.
No, I mean, you know, this is an age-old thing. I mean, you know, the sea lions, you know, it's a natural food source for them. But you know, I think there are much larger questions at play here to be dealing with, versus how to, you know, stop the salmon from being eaten, a small portion of them by the sea lions. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on that one way or the other.
All right, well, maybe you have an opinion on this one.
Okay.
Were you surprised about the pollution coming from the Canadian pulp mills?
Not necessarily. There's a town called Trail in British Columbia, where there used to be a very active mining operation. And I know that there was a lot of pollution that flew into that came into the Columbia from up there. I mean, it's like any pulp mill that you see in the state of Oregon or Washington. There's going to be there's always pollution involved. So no, I was not surprised to see that. Again, because the only part of the Columbia River that is completely protected, and I'm just so amazed that it has remained, is the headwaters section from Canal Flats all the way up to Kinbasket Lake, and it's some 200 miles. And if any of you have the opportunity to do a trip up there, I highly recommend it. It's only about 14-hour drive or so from here to get up there. That's just to the headwaters, and then you keep on driving. But it's some of the most spectacular scenery you'll ever see in your life.
All right. No more questions from you all? I'm going to wait just one more minute while people think of their questions. Are you hopeful? This is what I asked Blaine. Are you hopeful that there will be some recovery in the river?
Oh, yes, I am, because as the tribal leaders I have talked to, that they are relentless and resilient, and they said they learned everything that they have learned in their negotiations from the salmon. And if you think about the miracle of salmon, that to be able to go all the way out into the ocean, spend 3 to 5 years surviving out there and that thing, and then to be able to swim some 1,200 miles all the way up to the headwaters. I mean, this is no wonder why the salmon are revered by the tribes and First Nations. But I am hopeful, given the current administration, given that we have a Native American woman in charge of the Department of Interior, given that President Biden has nominated Chuck Sams to be the first Native American to be the head of the National Park Service. I just think that something is going to happen. I don't know in what shape or form it's going to, but I'm extremely hopeful and confident that the salmon runs will be restored. But this is just a starting process. This could take another 20, 30, 50 years. This is a generational thing. I mean, the recovery of the salmon is not dependent on the treaty. It's just an opportunity that's built in for people to have a negotiation to say, look, we know flood control, hydropower, irrigation is all important, but surely the restoration of salmon should take on equal importance. What do you say? Why don't you grow a pair, become morally correct and right the wrongs of the past. So I am eternal optimist and confident, and but it will take time. I'm realistic.
Okay. We did get another question that I'm going to just read. Has Peter, this is someone who came in late. He says, has Peter addressed the relationship between Hanford and the Columbia? He said, I'm late to the party, so maybe it's too hot to address, but I'm willing to ask anything. So.
No, I mean, not really. When I was trying to make a photograph from that area for the book, I intentionally avoided some of the stuff that's up there. I was trying to capture the image that's in the book. Was actually from the top of one of a very large sand dunes. For any of you who have ever been out to the Hanford National Monument, there are these really large sand dunes, maybe a couple hundred feet tall, that I climbed up on top of to get a good view of the. There's a wild and free stretch called the Hanford Reach. But no, I did not spend much time digging into that. This was a book that was focused on the tribes. I wanted to give them their voices, and so I just my role was just to organize people to contribute essays, to create images that give you sort of a highlight of the river, but really just have that be more kind of an armchair guide to the very powerful essays, which again, I can't stress enough that when you read them, if you're not moved, then there's something wrong with you.
Okay. Ready for the next question? I hope you make me laugh again.
Sure.
This one is, the Eurasian milfoil is starting to choke the river in shallow waters in the white salmon area. And was it an issue further north?
No idea.
I don't even know what a Eurasian milfoil is.
No, these are very specific questions to particular areas. I do not know the answer to that question. Again, my energy put into this was more of just sort of a big picture broader scope thing, and to let the tribes and First Nations and others, utilize my book to get out there and educate the public about the larger, greater good issue. I didn't spend a whole lot of time getting into the weeds, so to speak, about particular plants or pollution issues. So I'm sorry that I don't have answers to many of your questions tonight. At least
No.
answers that aren't satisfying. So.
Well, it sounds like from the questions we're getting, we probably really need to get a wildlife biologist in here to talk with us about the river more specifically.
Sure.
But that's not the focus of this. Your book is absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I want to remind people, it was said very briefly, that we will be having copies of Peter's book available at the Friends of the Library bookstore. If you want one, you can either give us a call or stop by next week. We will have them for sale by appointment, or we'll put one aside if you call us. Next week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I believe from 12 to 4. If that's not correct, Lynn, send me a text real quick. Someone's asking, what's your career in photography? So people want to know a little bit more about you.
Oh, I'm sorry, was there a specific question?
Yes, was your career in photography? So I guess the question
was
is,
it my career?
Is it?
Yes, it is. I just jumped in about 25 years ago. I am a transplant from the East Coast, landed in Hood River in the fall of '93. And in '94, I started dabbling part-time photography, self-taught. And 1995 is when I jumped in and just started. The way I learned was to just go into Portland. I went to the bookstores. I looked at the way that people were taking images, and I took that to heart. But then I just put my own filter, so to speak, on how I see things, and came up with my own style. And again, just self-taught. It was just something that I had always wanted to do. I had spent a few years, 3 years in a row in the late '80s. I had hiked the length of the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the length of Great Britain 3 years in a row as fundraisers for nonprofits. And all during that time, I was exposed to what John Muir refers to as the range of light. So I had a certain understanding of how to observe light and how it lays on the land. And so that was sort of my informal education all those years of hiking. So I never took a class. I was just self-taught and trial and error. And I grew up learning how to shoot film. And when the demise of film came along, I was not a happy camper. I'm still not a happy camper having to shoot digital, because I much prefer the magic and mystery of film. But to get work and survive these days, I had to switch to digital. So yeah, I just carved out my own niche, created my own vision, and ignored all the advice from everybody else and just carved things out my own way.
I do have a question about the book. I'm wondering, in the course of making the book, did you run into people who were refusing to talk to you, did not want to be on camera, or people who just weren't behind your project?
Let me think about this. No, I just know from my previous experience of and having an awareness of tribal sensitivity to having photos taken. I always made sure that if I was going to approach anybody from tribes or First Nations, that I would ask permission first, because I know it's a real sore point with many indigenous folks. So, but no, other than that, I didn't really have any issues at all. People were pretty friendly, especially up in Canada. I was like, oh my God, when, well, I'm revealing some of my political leanings. They had said, look, if a certain person becomes president, don't worry, you can come up here and you can park your truck in our driveway. Well, that happened, but I didn't have the, I couldn't run away from my country. I stayed here, but yeah, Canadian folks, their hospitality, legendary, love it. But no, I didn't have any, I can't recall any encounters with anyone that was negative.
That's really good to know. There's a comment here. Someone says, thank you for your passion and love of the river and Native Americans. It's so sad how we have affected their lifestyle and heritage.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's just, whew, there's so much that needs to be done, and I'm just one person trying to do my little thing. And I just hope that, when these COVID days are behind us, as much as I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all tonight in a virtual format, there's just nothing that replaces a live audience, to be able to engage, to tell stories, to hug people. Oh my God, to get a hug, to sign books, to tell stories, and to get out there in front of the public again. So I'm looking forward to that day happening again. Hopefully in 2022, I'll be able to get back out there, because the book is still relevant. There's still time to impact the treaty, and that's been my goal all along, is just to have this book be a part of the larger conversation about educating the general public that this stuff went down with the treaty and it was really bad stuff and we should fix it.
So again, if you want Peter's book, to hear these voices in their own voice, you can stop by the library next week, Tuesday or Thursday, or give us a call and we'll set a book aside for you. I'm not going to go into details of how you're going to get the book, but just come on in and talk to us and we'll help you get a hold of the book. I also want to remind everyone that we have an art show that's related to the River Lost. There are many pieces that are just very powerful that are on our website at the Fort Vancouver Regional Library. You can vote for your favorite piece. The voting closes on October 27th. So please get on the website. Let us know which of your piece is your favorite. There are a couple of photographs in there, not by Peter Marbach, but if you want to see some photographs of the river, they're in there. The pieces are really beautiful. Last thoughts from anyone before we say thank you and goodbye. I'm going to count to 30 in my head. This is your chance. Well, then I'm just going to say a big thank you to you, Peter. Thank you to the KOOBDOOGA committee that helped bring you here. Really appreciate your time. Your book is beautiful.
Thank you.
But more than the beauty, your book is powerful. And I think that's the most important thing, is that the voices, you brought these voices to light for us. So thank you very much. So thank you, Peter, very much for coming, spending time with us this evening. Thank you to all the participants and the questions you asked. You're getting some nice accolades in the chat. So long, and I hope to see you in real life, all of you, very soon.